All right, my name is Matt Ayers, and I'm interviewing Ms. Carrie Nall. We are at 199 North Main Street. The date is April 26, 2011, and the time is 10:13 a.m. Good morning, Ms. Nall. How are you?
Fine, and you. Good morning to you.
All right, so start out with, were you born in Mansfield?
No, I was born in Columbus, Ohio.
Okay. Why did your family settle in Mansfield?
Well, they were here in Mansfield all the time, but I was just born in Columbus, Ohio, right? Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any brothers or sisters?
Yes, I do. But I was adopted, so I have quite a few brothers and sisters. Yeah.
Okay. What was life like in your family growing up?
Well, since I was the only child, it was okay, very much okay.
So where did your parents work then?
My mother was more of a home care person. My father worked at Barnes's, Peabody Barnes. That was on North Main Street.
Okay. What was that exactly?
A pump manufacturing company.
Okay. All right. Where'd you go to school at?
I went to school at Krevling School. That was on Bowman Street in John Simpson, Sherman, and then Mansfield Senior High.
All right. Do you have any teachers that you remember especially well at all?
Oh, there was one named Miss Goodwin and Mrs. Durr, whose husband was Dalton Durr. Yeah, Mrs. Fouts. Yeah, I remember some of the times that I had in school. Might not remember the teachers. Right, yeah.
Care to elaborate at all on any of those?
Well, I remember one time they asked me what color the flag was, and I gave them every color except what it really was. So that evening when I got home, my father heard about it, and from then on, I knew what colors were in the flag. Yeah. So, but I had a good time.
Did you play? Were you involved in any sports?
No, no sports.
Okay. Any clubs or anything like that?
No clubs.
Okay.
No.
All right. So, what year did you graduate from high school then?
I didn't graduate from senior high. Yeah.
Okay. So, did you attend any schooling after high school at all?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't.
So, what was your first job then?
My first job was Neighborhood Youth Corps, and that was back in 1966. And that's when the Neighborhood Youth Corps was located on West 6th Street.
Okay, and what did they do, I guess?
Neighborhood Youth Corps was the same type of program that they have that they used to have, you know, where the children came in and they had jobs and things that were outsourced, and it was teaching us how to do different things. So I was a receptionist at that time.
Okay, do you remember how long did you do that for?
Oh, probably about 3 years. Yes.
Okay. Do you remember where you worked after that?
Really didn't work for a while. Then I went on in 1973 and I was employed by General Motors. And I worked there for 33 and a half years, and I retired in 2006. And when I left there, I was in quality. Yeah.
Thanks. All right, so what was the neighborhood like when you were growing up?
Well, it was a good neighborhood. When I first recall, I was raised on High Street. That's considered the North End. And in that particular area, there were more white people than there were African Americans, right? So.
Do you remember what year that was at all? What years those were, I guess?
Most likely in 1958, somewhere around in there.
Okay.
Yeah. Everybody it was just one big family. Blacks, whites, everybody, you know, played together, no problems, no more than what children have, you know, right? Much different than what they have today, problem-wise, yeah. In my home, my mother always had a lot of people in and out of the house. We had white people that stayed with us, black people. A lot of people would come to town and didn't have nowhere to stay. My mother was the type of person, she always opened her door to folks. So.
Do you remember some of the stores and restaurants in the neighborhood?
A&P was one of the grocery stores that was located on Bowman Street, more towards Bowman and 6th. There was one, it's now called TNA, but I can't remember what it was called, but it was located on Spring Mill Street. Then we had doctor's office back in the day on Spring Mill. One of our first black doctors was Dr. Christian, and he was on Spring Mill Street. Little stores that I probably went to were like over by the Friendly House, little mom and pop stores where you could go buy candy, pop, and stuff. Right.
So do you remember the names of some of those places?
No, I do not remember the name of that one. Yeah. Then as I moved on, well, when we left High Street, we went to Harmon Avenue, and that was out off of Bowman Street. Right, so we had a lot of stores. Ken and John's was one of the grocery stores. Watkins was one of the grocery stores. And then we had a drugstore on the corner of Bowman and Harker Street. Always went there a lot. Yeah.
Remember the name of that one?
No, I don't.
No?
I'm not good with remembering
Okay,
names.
yep. All right, so how's Never different today?
Well, I guess it's a little different because people are afraid now, so they don't befriend their next door neighbors real well. You know, back in the day, back in the 60s, I was on Harmon Avenue at that particular time. Me and my girlfriends, you went from house to house. Everybody knew everybody. Right. So now, you know, people don't know who their next door neighbor is. So it's quite different these days. Yeah.
So when do you think that started? You know, when did that start to change? I mean, do you have any kind of recollection of that when that started happening?
Oh, I would say in 2000 maybe.
Really?
Right. Back in the 90s and stuff, people were still more friendly then than what they are today. Yeah. Like I said, back in the 80s and the early 90s, the 70s, you just knew everybody who lived on your street. You know, you knew everybody's name, you knew all their kids, you knew what was going on in the neighborhood. Right.
All right, so what was life like for African Americans in the 60s and 70s in Mansfield?
I didn't experience a lot of discrimination in the 60s. And that was myself, because I guess I was just used to people. So white people, you know, I befriend anybody, everybody. I speak to everybody. It doesn't make a difference what color they are. You know, and then by growing up in the home where my mother had white people living, that was nothing strange to me, you know. And these were people, I remember back in the day, were people whose family members were, I don't want to use the word big shot, but they were sort of important. Right, we had a gentleman named, his name was, we called him Daddy Whip. And if I'm not mistaken, his father was a sheriff at the sheriff department. We had one named Elmer Thornsberry. His wife ran the Job and Family Service, what it's called now. Back in the day, I think it was called the Welfare Department. Yeah, so, and like I said, we all played together. When I was on High Street, that was predominantly more white people. When I moved to Harmon Avenue, then that became all African Americans.
All right, so did you ever have any, you said you never really had any racial bias affect you at all?
I didn't have any racial bias.
So did you ever personally witness anything in the neighborhood or that anybody else went through? Or?
No.
Okay.
No.
So do you remember?
Like I said, we ate at each other's tables. We were in each other's homes just like we lived there. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, when you went to the door, you knocked because that was the proper thing to do, but you just was right on in the house, you know. Everybody played together. They stayed all night at your house. You stayed all night at their house.
So do you remember anything about the civil rights movement going on in Mansfield?
No, I don't. No.
So do you remember any of the activities or stuff that was going on at all?
No, I don't.
No? Okay.
No.
All right, so do you go to church at all? Do you have a church
Yes,
that you go
I
to?
do.
Okay, which church do you go to?
Oasis of Love.
Okay. How long have you been going there for?
All my life.
Do you have any stories about that when you were coming up?
Well, yes, my mother was a missionary in the church, so that meant I went to church for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You know, there was Tuesday night service, Friday night service. Sunday you went at 9 o'clock for Sunday school and you stayed all day long. You didn't get home till probably about 10 o'clock on Sunday nights. Right. A lot of times you went to different friends' house after church for dinner and stuff, but other than that, we done a lot of traveling. My mother traveled a whole lot, so I've been a lot of places by her being a missionary. That enabled me to go places, meet a lot of people.
Yeah, what kind of places have you been to?
Well, different cities, and it was always about church, going to church, because they were running revivals and different things. So, you know, it was nothing for me to go to Marion, Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, Elyria, Ohio. I just went all over Ohio, and then some Michigan and different areas.
So what's the role of the church in your community?
I would say it plays a big part, but sometimes I feel that people expect more from the church because it all begins at home. And in my life, that's the way it always was. You know, it began at home. Now, when I went to church and I might have acted up, the members in the church would tell my mother, you know, and she would chastise me and things. But it played a big role in my life. Church members, my mother being a little older, they always shared. You know, it was nothing for my mother to say, well, I want you to go over here on Crystal Springs and pick me up a chicken. And I would have to go get a live chicken and bring it home. And then, you know, my mother would wring the neck and eat the water and have to pluck it. But they always shared, right? And back in the day when I was much younger, going to church all the time, you mostly you socialize with all the church girls, right? I was a young lady, I didn't get to go to the teenage places that they had for teenagers. Back in the day, they had Wednesday night dance at the friendly house. I didn't get to participate in any of that, right? So when I got a little older, I always said, well, I'm going to let my children go to these places that I didn't get to go to, so.
So you mentioned, I know some of the other ladies talked about going to church and where they went to the other churches in the area. Did you ever do any of that on Sunday?
Yes, like I said, we traveled a lot. So my church is Pentecostal, Church of God in Christ. So most likely we went to the other Pentecostal churches. Right.
Okay. All right, so tell us about your fondest memory growing up in the North End.
Probably liking some boy, some young boy, right, yeah.
So any other kind of memories you?
You know, I had a good time. Sometimes when people say, oh, I want to give my children what I didn't have, I think I had everything that I possibly needed growing up as a child. You know, I got to travel, go places, do things that a lot of young ladies didn't get to do, you know, but I didn't have a rough life. I had a good life.
So do you have a worse memory then?
Not really. Probably when I thought I was grown. Right. When I thought I was grown. That was probably the worst memory. Doing things that I had no business doing.
All right. Is there anything you'd like to add? Anything you'd like to discuss? I remember we had a conversation. You were telling me about there was a black newspaper once in Mansfield.
Yes, but I would say that I was a young person at that particular time, and I were listening to the older people talk, and I remember things that they would say, and that was one of them. They had a black newspaper back in the day. Probably before I was born, my mother had a fish market, which was down on Main Street, and she always worked in the restaurants. You know, like I said, she was a home person, but when she did work, she was always working in a restaurant. Years ago, they had a restaurant here called Mamie's, and I used to go down there and stay while she worked in the restaurant, and that was on Adams Street. And I think that was back in the 50s. Late 60s, there was one called the Busy Bee, and my mother ran that for a while, and I worked in there with her, you know, cooking meals and things, you know. I was just, my mother was a very well-known person, very popular, so it enabled me to be around a lot of things, you know, maybe some of the other young people didn't get to be around. And since I was the only child in the home, right, you know, I seen a lot of stuff and I heard a lot of things. So, right, I know a lot of things that went on in this city.
Sure, do you care to elaborate at all?
Well, you know, I remember them, just remembering things like when I was on High Street, we had the first black dry cleaning business that I remember them talking about. You know what I'm saying? I know now a lot of days they talk about the old clubs. I didn't participate in the old clubs. My mother did in her early years, but in her later years, she had got involved in the church and became a missionary. So she didn't patronize the clubs and things, but I would hear them talk about things. And I had a cousin, her name was Minnie Taylor at the particular time, and she's 3 years older than me. So we would sit up and talk about different things, and she would tell me about different things that were going on, you know, around town. And just listening to the old people talk, you know, probably shouldn't have been listening, but I was listening anyway. So I heard a lot of things, you know.
So any stories you'd like to tell us? I mean, I'm interested for sure.
Well, I can't tell the stories, but, you know, because I wasn't there to know the stories. Right. But I heard the old people talking about the stories, you know, things that the people were doing, such as the black newspaper they had. And I heard them talking about people's names that were in the newspaper. And they probably were doing things that they had no business doing. In some kind of way, someone told it, and the newspaper printed it out, you know. And I believe that that newspaper was being printed in Canton, Ohio. But it was delivered here, and I just do remember them always talking about the newspaper.
Yeah, do you remember the name?
They called it The Witch. Yeah. I heard about people selling alcohol back in the day. You know, that they had these houses and the people would go there to buy drinks and things. My father was not a church person, so he used to have what were called house parties. And people would come and gamble on Friday night, you know, and they would sell chicken sandwiches and different things. And then as I was young, I didn't get to be in the house at that particular time, but as I grew older, I would stay in the house when he would have these parties on Friday or Saturday night. And I learned how to cook early, so I would cook the chicken and sell the chicken and stuff to them. You know, so it was just a lot of things that were going on that I knew about was going on. Probably shouldn't have knew about them, but I did anyway, so, you know. And house parties would travel from house to house. Every weekend they would go to somebody's house that was different, and they would gamble, playing cards. And I think I learned how to play tump, watching them, and I loved to play tump at one time, right? So, yeah. Like I said, I knew a lot of things, but a lot of things I wasn't supposed to know. Right, yeah. But we'll go back to out on Bowman Street. They had little teenage places that teens would get to go, but I didn't get to go to them, but I knew about them. And a lot of times I would pass there in the evening coming home from school. You know, they wouldn't be open then, but late in the evening they would open up, and my girlfriends would tell me about who was there and all of that. So I knew about a lot of the stuff that was going on. Back then, like I said, we had more grocery stores that were in the area. They weren't black owned, but sometimes the blacks worked in them, you know. And as I was saying, you know, just different stuff that I knew. Back in the day, my mother and them sold dinners. Friday, you could always buy a dinner from somewhere. Somebody was selling chicken dinners and barbecue rib dinners and chitlin dinners, you know what I'm saying? Growing up as a teenager, you worked. You know, you worked in the home. Today, when you ask your child or something, I understand parents say, oh, I'd just rather do it myself. You know, because Mary's going to half do it, or they're just going to half do it. Back in the day when I was coming up, we didn't half do stuff. I remember one time, was told to wash dishes. half washed them. When my mother got in from church that night, probably about 10:30 or something, 11, I had half washed the dishes. She took all the dishes out the cabinet and made me wash them all over again. When they told you to get up and sweep the floor, you got up and swept the floor right then and there. Wasn't no wait an hour or 2 hours, you know what I'm saying? My mother was sickly a lot. A lot of times I was the only child, I had to cook. And I do remember one particular time. My girlfriends were all going to Liberty Park swimming. And I wanted to go. But that particular day, my father had told me to cook a beef roast. And I went to Liberty Park that day. When I got back home, the beef roast was still swimming in water. So you can imagine what happened. I got tore up that afternoon. You know what I'm saying? When they told you to do something, you got up and you done what they told you to do. Right, you know. I skipped school twice. Second time, he had a half a tree waiting on me. I didn't skip school no more. Right, things were just much different back in the day than what they are now. You know what I'm saying? So, and like I said, I had a good life. You know, I seen a lot of things. I know a lot of things that were going on that I probably wasn't supposed to, but I seen them. You know, I heard stories. And I believe that they were all true stories. But I wasn't there, so I really can't elaborate on them, you know. But I went to people's houses where they were not necessarily doing the right thing, you know. Yeah.
So do you have any other memories of the North End?
The North End, I had no problems on the North End. It was, like I say, it was me. I had about 4 girlfriends. We really hung together. We were all pregnant at the same time. You know, I had a good time. No rough times. Back in the day, my mother owned 4 houses on the street that I lived on. You know, I think when we first went, we went to a house number was 324. We went to 336, 282.
This was on Harmon?
This was on Harmon Avenue, right. Another one we went to. So she owned a lot of houses. You know what I'm saying?
So was she renting these, or what was she doing with these properties?
At that particular time, she would buy a house. Right, they would purchase these houses, and we'd move from one house to the next house, you know, trying to get a better place. Right, you know, everybody was trying to make it. You know what I'm saying? I had an aunt who lived across the street. They, back in the day, they called them stretching curtains. They would put them on this rack, and they would wash these curtains, and they just have them so full of starch. And then they would put them on here, and they would stretch them, you know. They stretched curtains, and they pressed them, and they done this for other people. You know, it was a thing about, you always was doing something for someone else. You know, it was a lot of times it would say, Carrie, I want you to run up the street and get some greens from somebody. You know, it was a thing of sharing. Back in the day, people just shared a lot of one another. Right, yeah. In the church, they had what was called prayer club, and they met every Tuesday morning, different people's houses. They went and they had prayer. They had the sewing band, and they would go and they would make quilts and things on Thursday evening. I think it was, people just got along. They know one another, and they got along with each other. Yeah. Like I said, I didn't have a rough life growing up. I had a good life. Yeah. Sometimes when people would say different things about back in the late 60s or early 70s out on Harmon Avenue, they had outside toilets. I never had an outside toilet. Thank the Lord I didn't. You know.
It was like an outhouse style?
Yeah, it was an outhouse, but they call them outside. You know, my cousin and them, they lived right across the street from us. They had one, but we didn't have one. And I really didn't want to spend the night at their house because I didn't want to go outside, you know.
And you said that was in the 60s and 70s they started?
That was, yeah. It was still existing back then. Right. I remember, you know, they had a lot of, I won't say a lot, but there was 3 bars, African Americans on the bars back in the day. African Americans back in the day, to me, they had more then than what they have now. Right, you know what I'm saying? Because it was nothing strange for them to have the bar, for you to see them in the grocery stores, work in the grocery stores, like you don't see that much no more. You know, at least I don't see it here. When I go to the city, I see a lot of African Americans working in the fashions, you know, grocery stores and different things. But here, you just don't see that. I don't know whether we're stuck in an area where they don't trust us or we don't apply for those particular jobs. You know. But I do notice that. You know.
So I have a question for you. Your mother, you say she owned 4 different homes at different times on Harmon there?
Yes.
So she never experienced any issues getting financing, or a lot of folks have told us about redlining and some of the issues that African Americans had attaining financing.
I don't think that she did.
Yeah.
Because they were probably buying some of these houses on land contract.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
That's what a lot of folks have told us, that was a pretty typical way that they went about it.
Right, buying them on land contract.
Okay.
Yeah. And then with her knowing so many people, my mother was very well gifted with conversation. Right. So she knew how to get the things that she wanted to get in life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell us anything about some of the more prominent African Americans, like O.C. Hill, or I think is it Jack Middlebrook, Mr. Middlebrook, and some of the things that they were doing? Does any of that mean anything to you in your life, or?
Not to me, but I've heard the names. My mother would have known these people very well, where I didn't know them. You know, I just heard of the names.
Okay.
Right. Yes.
Okay. What about any association with the company line, or any of the? I know that was pretty early. I know. I'm wondering if maybe any insight on that area of town, or anybody that you knew.
No, I didn't. You know, I've heard of the company line, and there were probably some families that I knew of, but I didn't know them well. Did not associate with any of them at that particular time. I was considered North End.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So.
Okay. Now, when which street is it that was off Bowman? Is that Harmon, or is that?
Harmon Avenue.
Harmon is off Bowman.
Right, but you could also get to High Street off of Bowman.
Okay.
You could go to the rear of High Street.
I see.
Right.
Now, is that far enough out to be what some folks have called the camps, or does that mean anything to you? I've heard a few people mention kind of out Bowman way north.
No, it's really, High Street is really located between Spring Mill and 6th Street.
Okay.
But you can also get to it from Bowman Street.
But Harmon isn't.
No, Harmon Avenue is strictly off Bowman Street, right across from the steel mill.
Okay. Okay. But you never heard anybody refer to that neighborhood as the camps or anything like that? Okay.
No.
Because I think that's the area. It might be a little south of where they're talking about, but they said it was directly across from the mill. And this was probably maybe a decade earlier than your time, at least.
Well, there was Fern, Grandview, Harmon Avenue, Charles Street, Lewis Street, and Crystal Springs.
Okay.
Right. So I really socialized with those people that were in that particular area.
Now, do those folks consider themselves North Enders? I mean, is that North
End?
Oh, yes. Okay. Because it's interesting as we've done this process to kind of hear some folks say one area is the North End. They're on a different neighborhood, but it just depends on who you ask, it seems like.
Right, I guess so.
Yeah.
But really, that was considered the North End.
Okay.
You know, when we were in high school, you know, we were considered the North End people.
Okay.
Right, yes.
Okay. Do you have any particular memories of, like, your father talking about his, job or anything like that, or what sort of work did he do? I know
he was in labor, factory work, and he didn't really talk about the job. You know, they had one of the, Barnes at that particular time had one of the best picnics, Christmas parties and stuff. So you heard about Barnes's, and I think also during that particular time the Westinghouse existed. You know, but you wanted to go to Barnes's picnic, and at that particular time their picnic was held at North Lake Park. And North Lake Park had rides and stuff back in the day. Christmas time, you know, they gave nice dolls and everything. You know, but since I was the only child, I always had a lot of this stuff. Christmas time, it was always, we had great big candy canes, you had the cherries, the chocolate covered cherries, you know. You just had some of everything at Christmas time, the fruit. When we had family dinners, there's nothing like family dinners now, because back in the day we had a variety of food. You know, now Christmas time comes, people say, oh, we're just having potato salad and ham. No, we had ham, turkey, dressing, you know, rabbit. They had coon back in the day. You had a meal, a real variety of food.
Yeah.
So things have really changed. I think we take so much for granted now, especially when it comes to family.
So when you talk about the rides in North Lake Park, was this like 60s we're talking about, late 50s?
No, I would say it was more in the 50s.
In the 50s, okay.
Yes.
So I'm just trying to.
We had they had a little Ferris wheel, merry-go-round, you know, with the little horses and things. They had rides.
Now, whereabouts in the park was that? I mean, was it near where the lake is, or was it more over where the old Coliseum was?
No, it was sort of centered right in the middle.
Really?
Right. You know, as you come in, if you're coming from 6th Street, where you would go 6th Street, turn to your right, go down one of those little streets. Well, you had that little lake there, but you had an area where the rides and things was, the pavilion was not there, I would say.
Okay.
Right, yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's hard for us to imagine what that was like.
Yeah, they had an area where they had rides and things, right, yeah.
And it was always called North Lake Park, even back then.
Back then, that's what I always knew it was, is
Yeah.
North Lake Park.
Okay.
Do you remember, was it now, some of the folks we interviewed said that some of the parks were segregated? Do you remember that?
I
being an
didn't
issue?
experience any of that. Right, you know, like I said, I was born in 1948, so I didn't experience a lot of the segregation that a lot of the older people have, you know. When we came along, we played softball on Sundays sometime at John's Park. Right, we just went to the park. Right, you know, wasn't no segregation, you just went to the park, right. And like I say, in the 50s when I was down on High Street, there was no segregation. You were just kids playing, family members, you know what I'm saying? People just stopping by. What you got today, Margaret? What'd you cook? You know, it was no segregation that I experienced. Yeah. Right. Now, when my mother was coming along, she probably did experience some segregation. You know, right, yes.
And so she lived all her life in Mansfield as
well?
well?
I think she was born in Tennessee.
I see.
And she migrated here. I don't know where.
Yeah.
You know, what time that she came here, but she was here. And
did she ever indicate why she came, or just a bit
no,
more
she
opportunity?
Did.
Or?
No, she did.
Yeah. Okay.
So do you have anything else that we haven't covered that you'd like to share with us?
No. Maybe a little later. Just give me a few and I'll think of some other things, but not right now.
Sure. Okay.
Okay.